good. And you're good. Okay. Perfect. Just a minute for everybody to grab a seat. Just find anything else you want. Oh, yeah. Okay. So I think that everybody is all seated. So just before we get started, we did forget to give everybody a ticket for the bake that we're giving away. So Toby's just going to walk around and hand everybody each a ticket for that giveaway, which we'll be doing shortly after the presentation. First and foremost, thank you everybody for showing up. Thank you everybody for coming to our first campfire event. We weren't too sure about the full turnout, but so far I'm happy with it. So once again, thank you for coming. Today we are doing a presentation. Evan is going to be doing a presentation. It's going to be on long distance trekking, how to pack for it, and just some of the things that he can pack. Evan here, I couldn't memorize your full bio, so we're going to read it out. Evan's a landscape and fine art photographer from Alberta. He owned and operated a commercial photography studio in Tokyo, Japan for 6 years before returning to Canada in presentation in 2020. His work has been featured in many publications and international ad campaigns. Evan has received numerous awards and recognition for his work, including an International Landscape Photographer of the Year award in 2020 and back-to-back Photographic Artist of the Year award in 2021 and 2022 from Professional Photographers of Canada, as well as having been chosen to represent Team Canada at the World Photographic Cup. Evan's focus is on selling limited edition art prints, running photographic adventure tours and workshops, as well as an adventure style portrait and elopements. So that's his bio. It's quite the resume, if you ask me. But yeah, I'll hand it off to Evan.
Sure. Thanks so much, Jake. And we can lights pretty soon.
Yeah, I'll get him here.
Okay, well, yeah, thanks, Jake, for the introduction. My name is Evan Will. I'm originally from a small farming community near Edmonton. I joined the military when I was 18, and I lived abroad for quite a few years before returning to Canada. And like Jade said, I was in Tokyo operating my photography studio for 6 years before COVID kind of slowed things down, and I did come back home for that. So yeah, the presentation today might be fairly dark. But yeah, we don't need to use a slideshow. I'm originally from a small farming community. I've been in Alberta all my life. When I was a small kid, I started ice climbing. Internet and my fortunate. I was in Tokyo operating my photography studio for 6 years before COVID and excellent things down. I did come back home. But for me, I really approach. So yeah, the presentation today will be pursuits from the lens of. But yeah, we don't need to use a slideshow. I'm originally from a small farming community. I started ice climbing. Pounds of candy here. Specific questions about that, I'd be happy to do before. But for me, I really love who I am. So I started ice climbing. So I do. I started ice climbing. How are those pictures? They good? Okay. I had some of my work that I was just going to display, but so I do like to go to a lot of places, both deserts, mountains, rivers. I will jump through the views. Can you guys see those at all? Not too much? Okay. Well, pardon me. I broke the presentation down into 3 main sections: what to bring, materials and fabrics, and then also how to pack. And I did bring a fair bit of gear that I generally take. I always take all of this gear on every trip, no matter how short. Totally kidding. So the best thing about learning to pack is packing specific to the trip that you're going on. So where are you going? What time of year are you going? Are you going to be in the highlands? Are you going to be down at sea level? When I packed for Ecuador, it was actually unique because Ecuador pretty much they kind of have a rainy season and a dry season, but there's not much variance except that the elevation, they've got coastline, and then Quito, the capital, is around 10,000 feet, 2,800 meters. So technically that's anything above 2,500 meters is considered high altitude. So by being so high, the variance between the coast, where it was super, super hot, and Quito, where it was actually quite cold and dry, and then the jungle, where it was crazy humid, almost meant that I was packing for 3 different trips in like one carry-on and one backpack, essentially. So I certainly don't take all of this with me, but I will be speaking to some of the items that I do pack for different trips. So while it is nice to have, sit on your camp stool, roast some marshmallows over the fire, and have a beer or something, it's not ideal when you are backpacking and carrying everything with you for 4 or 5 days at a time. So my favorite piece of kit is actually this guy right here. Does anyone have one of these? It's a luggage scale. So I weigh all of my gear constantly, and I always try to pare down what I'm bringing, because if you want to bring everything, you're going to end up with like a 55, 60-pound pack. I did the West Coast Trail in 2008, so it was a little while ago, on my mom's 50th birthday. And I had an 85-pound pack for the entire West Coast Trail. I don't know if you guys has anyone done the West Coast Trail? Not yet? Okay. Is it on the list for anyone?
Plan to.
Yeah? Okay, sweet. Awesome. Actually, maybe I'll just pull the audience too. Who's pretty experienced with trekking, backpacking, hiking, mountaineering, anything like that? Not too much. Who's done maybe a few, a few multi-day trips? Okay, cool. And who's never gone on a multi-day trip before? Sandy? Oh, that's crazy. Cool. Well, yeah, I'll try to tailor it to to anyone. So if you're very experienced and you have gone before, I'll try to have some value-add items there. But I will just kind of base it around what essentially you should bring. I have broken it down into a list of 4 essentials. You guys probably can't read that, but I will send this PDF out. If you guys supply your email afterwards, I'll send this out in an email. It's just kind of a packing list. It's broken down into we've got clothing and footwear, camping gear, safety and first aid, and hydration and nutrition. So those are kind of the 4 categories I like to bunch everything into. So obviously, clothing and footwear, that's going to be different depending on whichever trip you go on. Camping gear is usually going to be pretty consistent. And then safety and first aid, I kind of tie those together. So safety and first aid could be anything like bringing like a guide first aid kit. I've never brought this on a multi-day hike. I do pare this one down into, this is my multi-day first aid kit. So while this is great if I'm leading a group and I've got access to a vehicle or something, or car camping, I can do a lot with this. If you're ever going to have something happen in the wild, you have to be fairly resourceful with a lot of your resources. So I recently finished a 90-hour first aid course, Advanced Wilderness First Aid, and it talks about making like tourniquets out of belts and using your pants and your backpacks to kind of create splints and things like that for walking, and stretchers for carrying people out. But definitely have a first aid kit. As far as first aid as well, has anyone used bear spray before? Yeah. Oh, used it? Oh, you've used
Carried
it?
it or used
Carried it or used it, yeah. Hopefully you haven't had to use it. They do expire, so when they do expire, it's always fun to just kind of go to a place that's not in a very well-ventilated place, maybe in the country, and kind of blast them off, just to see. It's important to blow them off to see the range and the spread in the spray. I've had a few instances where there was the bear was upwind from me, and this is going to blow back into your face if you're aiming it at a bear, and it's not fun to have this in your face. But bear, certainly in Canada and the Rockies, bear spray is an essential. You definitely want to have this. Some places it's mandatory. Scott and I are, this is Scott. Scott and I are doing the Tombstone Park hike. It's called the Grizzly Trail. We're doing that in August. And they mandate that you have to have bear spray. And that's more so for the bear's protection than for yours, because if there's an incident with a bear, they usually have to put it down or relocate it, and it's quite a big deal. They also mandate that you have to have a bear canister. So a bear, I don't have my Ursack with me, but an Ursack is a Kevlar bag that bears can't rip into, neither can little rodents, squirrels, and things of the like. But in Yukon, you actually have to have a hard bear canister to put your food in that seals it so they can't smell it, they can't approach it, they can't get into it. The cool thing about having one of those is if you don't want to bring a camping stool, which I've got somewhere, the bear can you can actually use as like a little stool here to sit when you're camping, and it's super awesome. So first aid kit. So when I talk about safety and first aid, it's more about risk avoidance. So having a map, having a compass, and not just a map on your phone. Like I use the Garmin Explore app, and I've got my my InReach. So I've always have a map downloaded, and I've got my location, and I can send an SOS. But batteries do die, which is why it's also important to bring extra batteries when you're camping. But batteries do die, so having a paper map is awesome. And actually, Cindy, I'm going to talk about the camp pants because these are actually my favorite my favorite trekking trousers I've ever had. This pocket is designed to fit a map perfectly. So those GemTrek maps, they fit in here like absolutely perfectly, and they're super handy. So having a digital map, paper map, first aid kit, a compass, navigational aids, things like that will certainly help you avoid having trouble in the backcountry. Other items that I actually include under safety and first aid is things like bug repellent as well as sunscreen. And the reason being, I used to work on a farm in Australia, and Alberta boy going down to Australia wasn't used to the intensity of their sun. So I was mustering sheep on the farm on a quad one day. It was about a 16-hour day, and I had a t-shirt on because it was so hot, and bare arms. My arms were so burned on the quad, and I couldn't leave the sheep. I took my shirt off and wrapped it around my arms to try to stretch out where my burn was, because the sun was just so intense, and it was absolutely so painful for days and days after. Just making sure that you're hydrating properly. Have that SPF 50 sunscreen is really good, and also a sun hat. I don't know where mine is. Do you know where my Tilia's? I do know Fjällräven makes really good. Those up there. Something with a wide brim, ideally made out of nylon, is really good because they're going to float in the water. They're going to repel rain. They're going to dry really quickly. Most importantly, they're going to keep the sun off of your nose and your ears, and that's the spots that you really have to worry about quite a bit. I did take a wide brim hat down to the Amazon, and we were in this canoe for 2 hours going to our lodge, and there was this torrential downpour. It was just absolutely soaked, and a nylon hat like that keeps all the rain off of your head, which is great. And then the last one, obviously, hydration and nutrition. You have to make sure that you pack for your trip, make sure that you're hydrated well. Does anyone know what an average intake of water should be for about a 180-pound person? Just under normal conditions, like average metabolism? What's that?
Half of your body weight?
Of water?
Yeah. Like in ounces, right?
In ounces, okay. I was like, 100, yeah.
Forgot to check again.
90 liters of water a day would be so impressive. 90 ounces, that's exactly it. So for someone, 3.5 liters is for someone who's 180 pounds. Under average conditions, you should be drinking that much water per day. As soon as you're hiking outdoors in extreme heat, that number is going to bump way, way up. I was landscaping yesterday for about 16 hours outside, and I drank 8.5 liters of water. Thank you. Yeah, well, I probably shouldn't promote these ones, but Fjällrävens are great too. I like that half your body weight if you're used to ounces, and then if you are in liters, then obviously we can correct, because 32 ounces to a liter I think is about the rough equation. Okay. Cool. So sun protection. Also, mosquito repellent. Is anyone allergic to DEET? Does anyone know what DEET is? DEET, yeah. Active ingredient in most sunscreens. DEET is great. It keeps mosquitoes away, but as soon as you get it on any kind of plastics, that includes polyesters, nylons, even like pants like these, it's going to eat into them and degrade them and wear them away. So they do have different types of insect repellent that don't have DEET in them. Some are not as effective. Some just, they smell like, I can't remember this. There's citronella and there's like pictorin. There's a few different additives that they put in that are quite good. But generally, DEET is going to be the best to ensure that they're not biting you. Another kind of plug for these pants. These are mosquito-proof pants. So mosquitoes actually can't get through the G1000 fabric, which is kind of cool. So I usually don't worry about putting mosquito repellent on my legs for times like that. All right. Oh, and I will have, I did want to mention too, there will be a Q&A at the end. So if there's questions that you had that are maybe outside the scope of what we're talking about, please feel free to ask them. But if you have any questions pop up in the moment, please feel free to ask them. I'll try to address them as they come up. Cool, so fabrics and materials. Can't see the nice little photo of my mom there. It's too bad. So fabrics and materials. It's not that one fabric is better than another fabric, but what I like to, when I think about packing clothing and what I'm going to bring, you just want to break it down into 3 layers. Does anyone know the 3 essential layers? Part of the layering system?
Base layer.
Base layer? Okay. Base layer, what are the other 2?
Mid layer.
Mid layer or insulating layer? Yeah, mid layer, and then outer layer, cool. Yeah, outer layer, yeah, you got it. So the function of a base layer, sweat is the enemy. So you don't want to sweat. As soon as you sweat, you're going to get cold, you're going to lose a lot of water. So what you want to do is avoid sweating, and you want to have fabrics that are touching the skin that are wicking, meaning they're pulling the moisture and water away from you and evaporating them away to cool you down. Cotton is very, very bad for this. When cotton gets wet, it doesn't insulate. It cools you down dramatically, and it becomes very clammy and it shapes. So my absolute favorite material for base layer is wool. It's natural. There's some good synthetics, but wool is natural. It is odor resistant. Just the way the fibers are shaped, the bacteria that causes odor don't grow on it. It can stretch to a third of its size without losing its shape. It can also absorb a third of its weight in water without feeling wet. And most importantly, it insulates when it's wet. So if you do happen to get wet, you fall in a puddle or you are sweating a lot and you're still wet, the wool will still insulate you. So there's a saying on the trail, cotton kills. Cotton is very, very dangerous. If you are sweating, you're going to lose a lot of body heat. So base layers, all of my base layers are wool. As far as insulating or mid layer, there's a lot of really good fabrics. Anyone have a favorite material for Alberta winter specifically? Jade, I know you're from Vancouver.
No, I mean, coming from Vancouver,
Yeah.
it was more so as long as it was windproof.
Yeah.
For Alberta, I mean, almost any layer, because it's so dry.
It's so dry here, that's the thing.
You don't really, in my experience, I haven't had to have any special layer. It's as long as you have as many layers as possible, usually
Yeah.
it's fitted good.
My absolute favorite is down for Alberta, and that's because it's dry. Down does not insulate when it's wet, but nothing is going to beat down's warmth to weight ratio. So down is going to insulate incredibly, incredibly well, and in dry environments like Alberta, so high elevation, we're kind of, like Colorado, Alberta, anything kind of near the Rockies on the eastern side of the Rockies, down is going to be really good for because we have very, very dry, cold winters, and down really keeps that in. Whereas Vancouver or the UK or like Scandinavia on the coast, you're going to have very, very humid. It's not as cold, but it's very humid, and the down kind of absorbs a lot of that moisture. It packs down, and it loses its insulation ability. So in environments like that, wool is another good insulating mid layer, like a nice high pile fleece or something like that. It's very good. Awesome. And the other cool thing about down is it packs down super, super small. So I always carry this in my bag, just kind of as an emergency. It's just a little down vest that packs into a little pocket on the inside. And I like to get down with a little shape, just to kind of fill it up. And then this will help insulate really, really well in those dry conditions. If you've ever seen the really big parkas, like a down-filled parka, they're often called a belay jacket. Anyone know why that is? Because they're used for belay. So in climbing, climbing is kind of an interesting sport. There's generally the climber, and then there's also the belayer. So your belayer is on the bottom of the rope. They're holding onto you with a brake for safety in case you fall. When you're climbing, you're moving, you're going to be generating some heat, you're going to get pretty warm. As soon as you get to the top, you start belaying your partner, you've stopped moving, it gets super, super cold, and you don't want to be wearing that. So that's when you would put on your belay jacket or your down parka, because same thing with like ski touring or any kind of high aerobic output activities in the mountains. When you're moving, you're very, very hot. As soon as you stop to like change over your skis or like put your skins on or skins off for skis, or change over to belaying, now you're just standing there in the cold. Now, especially if you've been sweating, that's going to get really, really wicked cold. That's why you'd have like a down jacket to put on in those times. I generally never wear down when I am climbing or when I'm hiking or doing anything like that, because down, again, as soon as it absorbs that moisture, it's going to get super, super cold. That having been said, the other thing too, I did Moline Lake, did a 5-day kayak trip there actually with Scott, and Gord was too scared to come. Gord is Scott's dad. You were too scared to come, were you? Is that fair? Is that fair to say?
Parts of it I was.
Yeah. Gord,
I was a little scared on the trip, so.
Gord was invited on that trip. He had to pull out at the last minute, which is too bad. We look forward to having you on the Talking Valley, though, hopefully.
Look forward to it.
And yeah, it's going to be such a good trip. So anyways, we're on Moline Lake. So it was pretty high output. We had to paddle 13 kilometers to get to our first campsite. So we were generating a lot of heat. And then as soon as you get to camp, you're kind of sitting there, like playing cards, cooking food, and you get really, really cold. So having something that you can wear at camp is a really, really good idea to pack along with you. And I prefer down because it's just low output. You're sitting there, it's nice and warm. Now, one thing with down too, there's different fill powers or different lofts of down. You might hear 650 fill power down, 800, 850, 900 would be like really high-end premium. Do you guys know what those mean or what the significance of them are? Yeah? Uh-oh.
Like a part per million, like how it's spread out.
It's exactly how it spreads out. So it's actually the weight of the volume that it can fill for a given weight. So higher fill power down, all it means is it's going to occupy the same space. It's going to occupy the same space with less weight. So high fill power down, the down is going to weigh less, but it's going to occupy the same space, keeping you the same level of warmth. Because the way down works is it traps pockets of hot air, so you just want a lot of volume. High fill power down will also keep its kind of springiness and loft a little bit better longer. It will lose if you wash down a lot. You want to make sure that you use a down fabric so it doesn't deplete the down. And also, it's a good idea to dry it with tennis balls or something to maintain that fluff. So if you guys ever wash your sleeping bags, most sleeping bags, like high-end sleeping bags, are down. That's a really good idea. And then the last one, the shell layer. So shell layer, as Jade mentioned, is designed to stop the wind and the water from getting through to you. So a lot of shell layers will use Gore-Tex or some sort of waterproof, breathable membrane to prevent you from getting wet. I know Fjällräven has one of the interesting things about the shell layers. So there's a Gore-Tex or like a waterproof, breathable membrane that doesn't allow water in. But when you sweat and it mixes with the air, the water vapor is small enough to permeate through those holes. So water droplets can't get in, but sweat vapor can get out. So if has anyone ever worn like one of those big rain slicks in like really, really wet weather? Yeah, like on if you go to Tofino or something, or if you ever work on a boat, like a fishing boat, they're solid rubber. They're amazing. Nothing's going to get through it. But if you're working, you're generating a lot of heat, and it's also not getting through it. So it traps, and then you end up getting wet from the inside.
Waterproof both ways.
Waterproof both ways, yeah, exactly. So the waterproof breathable membrane, liquid doesn't get in, but your sweat and water vapor does get out, in theory. It's not always great, but the big problem with, and then there's also the DWR, which you may have heard, it's durable water repellency. That's a spray that you put on that, if you've ever seen the water like bead off of clothing, that's the DWR working. So DWR is great, except it's not very good for the environment. So I do know Fjällräven is doing some PFC-free DWR treatments that you can spray on, which is pretty awesome because it's good for the environment. It still keeps that waterproofness. With that, yeah, so I always bring, you don't want to get stuck out on a hike, like a 4-day hike in the rain, and then just be wet the entire time. So I always bring a waterproof jacket as well as waterproof pants. Here's the awesome diagram showing the base layer, mid layer, and outer layer. Cool, that's what you missed out on, Gora. You can't see it, but that's on the lean link. And then, yeah, the last thing I wanted to touch on in terms of packing is how to pack. And I can also send this out as well, but actually, did you have maybe a Fjällräven backpack that I could just
Loaded or
and unloaded one would be great. So a couple things to think about when you're loading your pack is where do you want to put the items. So there's a few different zones you want to use in your backpack. You guys can see this too well, but you got zone 1, 2, 3, and 4. So this is your back. Like the person would be standing here. 2 is going to be your heavy items. So anything that's very heavy, you're going to want to load as close as you can to your center of gravity and to your back. So that's things. What things would be heavy on your trip? Shoes? Bring a lot of shoes, Krista? Shoes would be heavy. What else is something that might be heavy that's good to load there?
water bladder?
Water is very heavy. Yeah, water is one of the heaviest things you're going to take. So you'll actually notice on a lot of, including
Sorry, it's a small one, but it'll work.
That's all great. So for this guy, most packs, this one does have, so there's the water bladder holder right here in this pack, and then there is a little suspension ring to the top, so you can wrap your water bladder around the top, and it just sits nice right to your back. And that's, because water is one of the heaviest things, it's right there. So if you put all your heavy weight to the outside, what you're doing in effect is you're moving your center of gravity further back, and you have, like when you swing around, it's going to carry you, and you lose that leverage. So heavy things like water, and in my case, I always carry, unfortunately, quite a bit of camera gear with me. Camera gear is very heavy too. So I've got a dedicated camera backpack that has, so it zips up and opens on the front. And then all your camera gear is right there, right next to your back. So you're keeping all that heavy weight right on your back. What goes at the very bottom of the sleeping bag? Almost always. What's that?
He said it, sleeping bag.
Sleeping bag, yeah. What did I say? What goes in the bottom of your sleeping bag? Is that what I said? Nice, good catch. Yeah, so sleeping bag usually is going to go at the bottom. Reason being, traditionally, with even with external frame backpacks and kind of the earlier days of backpacking, there was always a compartment at the bottom for your sleeping bag, which was usually a waterproof compartment. And very often people wouldn't even put it into a compression sack, they just stuff it in the bottom, because that's the last thing you're going to take out. Right, you get to camp, you want to set up, you're going to bring out your tent first usually. You're going to set up your tent, you're maybe going to move your food out, put it in a tree or a bear locker or something like that, and maybe you have your clothes like in a little compression sack, you pull those out. And then the very last thing is your sleeping bag. So that goes at the very bottom because it doesn't need to be accessible. So usually at the bottom, your sleeping bag, you've got your water, your heavy items, your gear, and then 3, you want to put your lightest gear there so that the furthest part away from your back. So things like that would be clothes, like socks, underwear, clothes, things like that. And then at the very top, or the brain of the bag, as it's sometimes called, that's where you want to keep items that you have to access a lot. So up there, you might want to have snacks for the trail. You might want to have, I have my electronics, like I have got my knife up there. I've got my stove, my isobutane, which fit into my little water boiling, what are these called? Cups? Stove, can't remember what that's called. But anything that needs fast access and quick access, you're going to put up at the top. And I did want to say, could you pass me the enlightened equipment? It's the big light one. Who here has a sleeping bag? Pretty much everyone? Yeah. Who has a down sleeping bag? Some people. Okay. Who has a synthetic one? Okay. So these are both down, but synthetic sleeping bags are very good. They're usually a little bit heavier. They don't insulate as well. They generally will insulate when they're wet. Down compresses incredibly small. Doesn't insulate when it's wet, but you're getting really good bang for your buck. This little guy is rated to -18 Celsius. And there's also three numbers. If you ever buy a sleeping bag, there's 3 numbers on them. There's a comfort rating, there's a rating, a comfort rating, and then there's like a survival rating, which they don't usually post, and that's like, you'll survive, you won't enjoy it, but you'll survive down here. You don't want to do that. And typically the comfort rating is rated usually for women because they sleep a little bit warmer. And so there's usually a rating for women and for men, and that's very important to note. You'll probably fluctuate a little bit depending on your body makeup and chemistry, but just make sure that you pay attention. There are 2 ratings for sleeping bags. So just because it says -6 doesn't mean you're going to have a fun time at -6. The other thing I was going to say, does anyone's sleeping bag come with one of the storage sacks versus compression sack? Yeah? I think most of the good ones are coming with them now. You want to keep it this way when it's stored at home. It allows the down to loft and it doesn't compress it. If you store some down sleeping bag in a compression sack like this, like you can really cinch these down to get them small. But if you store it here for any length, like several months at a time, it's going to compress the down and it's not going to get the same loft that it had, and it's going to prematurely wear its life out. So if it does come with ideally like a cotton or a mesh bag that's breathable, because you don't want mildew or anything to grow inside there, and you always want to make sure that you dry your sleeping bag out as soon as you get back from a trip. store it in the big bag, and then when you're actually doing your trips, then put it down in the compression sack. This one is actually a quilt. Does anyone have a quilt or a traditional sleeping bag?
I do.
You do, Scott? Tell me about your quilt.
So I camp in a hammock, or when I can. And so the thing about down sleeping bags is that one of the surfaces you'll always be laying down on, so the down will decompress. So what a quilt does is it actually just removes that bottom layer, and so it makes it lighter, it makes it easier to store, and yeah, it looks like that.
So on this quilt, right there, at that end is the foot box. The foot box is the only enclosed part of the bag. So your feet would go into there. And then you just get a high insulating pad that you want to sleep on, and then the quilt goes over top of it. Because traditional sleeping bags, as soon as you lay on them, you're like, well, anytime you lay it on down, you compress it, it's no longer warm. So you're actually losing all that insulation value anyways. So a quilt, you just have to make sure you've got a good pad that you can sleep on that's insulating. And pads will have R values, like a winter rating would be like an R5. R3 is kind of a 3 season, and R1 would be like a summer pad. And then there's little straps that kind of clip on to the side of your mat. So it's basically like sleeping on a bed with a quilt over top of you. And you're saving, like this is actually a double. You can see there's like 2 little head holes up here. And so this is a double quilt, so 2 people can sleep under here. And it's actually less weight than my single person sleeping bag.
Do you and Scott both sleep in this one?
Scott sleeps on the left side, I sleep on the right. In his hammock.
There are 2-person hammocks available.
I do have a really fun video of Scott, my mom, my brother, and I went to, has anyone been to Valhalla Provincial Park in BC? We went to Gwillem Lakes, which is this awesome hike. It was it's near Caslow, kind of the Slocan Valley. So it was 24 degrees at the valley floor. As we were driving up, there was a big tree that had fallen across our path. We had to do a lot of off-roading to get to the trailhead. So we ended up having to saw through the tree, tow it off the path, and then kind of drive up. By the time we got to, it ate up a few hours of our time. By the time we actually hiked up to the site, it was there was about 6 inches of snow on the ground, and it was -4. And my mom and I slept in the 2-person tent, and Scott had lent my brother his, I don't even know what that was, but
It was a single.
it was barely a tent.
It's a single for me. It might be more of a 0.75 for.
So my brother Taylor had never set it up before, but it takes 2 of your hiking poles, and it took us a while to get it figured out. But yeah, you don't want to be caught up there like not knowing how to set your tent up, and also not expecting -4 when you were expecting like +7. That was pretty big. So we had to clear an area of snow and then set our tent up, and it was very cold. There was frost on the tent in the morning when we woke up. I got a cute little time-lapse video of that if you want to see later. And yeah, anyway, Scott likes his hammocks, but you can't do hammock camping everywhere. So if you're doing a lot in the national parks, there's a lot of trails that won't allow hammock camping. So then I don't know what Scott does. He just curls up on the ground and I'm going to say yeah, and food as well. Oh yeah, I was going to say, how much food do you bring on a camping trip? You don't have a good answer?
2-3 days.
2-3 days. Yeah, let's say you're going on a 5-day trip.
5-day trip.
Yeah, 6 days. Always, yeah. X+1 at least is a good rule of thumb. Because you want, like, if something happens, you have to spend another day up there. You should bring a little bit extra food so you're not going hungry. On the trip that Gord abandoned us on, sorry Gord, on Moline Lake, I had my friend and her brother, Jay Ham. Actually, let's just call him Johnny H. Johnny H came on the trip, and he didn't bring any food for 5 days. Yeah, his sister was on the trip, and he expected her to, like, he's the younger brother, obviously, and he just expected her to have all the food for the entire trip, which she did bring a lot extra. But we didn't really realize this until, was it the last day? And he was poor Johnny was just sitting there like freezing and shaking, and he was absolutely starving. And Scott's like, oh, I've got like 4 extra bags of food. So yeah, so if you camp with a Johnny, just make sure you always bring a lot of extra food. And when it comes to food too, dehydrated food is going to be really, really good. So I'm not specific with the brand because my mom has a dehydrator and she makes the best meals. But bringing dehydrated food is great. They compact down really small. They're super light, and then you can just boil 500 mils of water, dump them in there, and then or like dump the water into the pack, eat it out of the pack, and super light and very easy to do. Got to bring some protein for those trips as well. Proteins and fats are going to be a lot better than carbohydrates as well. So beef jerky is super good. Nuts are very good. I can't stand trail mix, but peanuts on their own are great, and like raisins are great on their own. Just when you mix them together, no taste. It's not good. Oh yeah, I was going to mention this too. Talking about the sleeping pads. So we've got a closed cell foam pad, and then we've got a. This is an inflatable pad. Which comes with a really cool bag that you kind of blow into the bag, which fills it up fast, and then you can just pump to inflate your pad. There's benefits to both of these. This is much more expensive than this. A benefit of this guy, though, is it's deployed. So instant deploy, they're super comfy. They're also thermoreflective, the ones that have this silver layer. Generally you put the silver to the ground, although some brands say to do different, but you want to reflect, they're thermoreflective, so they reflect the heat back up into you. These are waterproof, so they're not going to puncture, so whereas if this gets punctured, you're going to be sleeping on the ground. These guys are very durable. They're almost impossible to destroy. You can keep them on the exterior of your pack because if they get wet, it doesn't matter, you just shake them off and then they're waterproof. They're really quick to dry. And then in the winter, for my sleep system, I actually bring this, and I double them up. So then I've got like R value of 7 or something when I stack them together. So if I'm camping out in -20, then I can actually do that pretty comfortably with this, just with these two items. And I've also got this little guy, which is just a little pad. I was doing you guys know the Columbia ice fields on the Highway 93 between Jasper and Banff. So I was climbing Mount Athabasca last year, it was July and August, so absolute middle of our summer. And it was freezing because we're on a glacier at the top. So we climbed up the glacier, and then we had lunch on the top of the glacier. Having something like this, I fold it up like this, I put it between my alpine pack, it just sits there, and then if I ever need to have lunch, I can sit that on a rock or on a cold place. Like if I'm sitting on a glacier, I throw that on the ice and I sit on it, and instant insulation. It is very uncomfortable to be sitting on a glacier with nothing else to protect you from that cold. It's a very uncomfortable day if you don't like sitting on your pack like this. I'm also going to talk just a little bit. So I talked a little bit about wool clothing and how it keeps you warm when you're wet. The best thing to do is avoid sweating altogether. So having like side vents on your pants is amazing for when you're hiking. So if you're hiking, you're moving, you're generating a lot of heat, just vent yourself. These guys happen to have two, top and bottom. So as you're hiking, you can just zip and vent, dump a lot of heat. And then you still have protection if you're hiking through like thick grass or something. It's not going to rash your legs up too bad. Whereas when you wear shorts, it will certainly do that. And also, make sure you bring your camp shoes. Crocs are not only fashionable, they're waterproof and they're fantastic for camp. You want something comfortable at camp that you can wear around while you dry out your hiking boots or whatever your trail runners are, because you don't want to put on wet boots the next morning. It's just going to lead to a bad situation. And I know you mentioned it. You always hike in double socks, you said, right? Yeah. Double stocking is a really good. I don't think I brought I've got my liners somewhere. Oh, the black ones are. Thanks. Actually, I'll grab those too. Yeah, so these are both wool, 100% wool. These are liner socks, so they're very thin, and they're going to go on first, and then you put your over socks on over that. It may seem counterintuitive, but this might actually keep you colder, like cooler in the summer. If you wear a single pair, wool will absorb a lot of that sweat. But what happens when your feet get wet and there's a lot of friction and it's hot is you get really bad blisters. What these guys are designed to do is rather than your foot rubbing against your sock and your shoe, is these start rubbing together. So it mitigates that friction. Your foot doesn't feel as hot and you don't get hot spots or blisters, it's a really good idea. So I know some people swear by doing double socks, like right there. It's I double sock very, very often, even in the summer when it's super hot. So it does seem counterintuitive, but double socking will save you a lot in blisters. And
what's the black sock is made of?
It's wool. This is merino wool, and I like merino wool because it's smaller fibers, so it's a lot more comfortable in the skin. These are also 100% merino. But yeah, that friction just comes between these, so it's not between your foot and your boot. Because blisters, they don't sound like they're a big deal, but blisters will slow you down. They will, and you don't want to have like an open infected blister when you're like doing 5 days in the backcountry, because the hike out is going to be a lot longer. Like, you're not going to have fun. The hike out is a lot longer, and it can actually lead to you might have to do an emergency evacuation or a rescue, which is super not fun. So taking care of your feet. When I was in the military, they told us to pack. It was always twice the number of socks as every other piece of clothing. And I think that's a really good rule of thumb. And they would actually have days when we were doing like basic training in the bush where they would say mandatory change of socks. So it's like, okay, everyone stop, drink a liter of water, change your socks before we can continue, and actually force you to do that. Because in that environment, like if you are deployed or something, you're not just impacting yourself, you're impacting your entire platoon and group of people. So they're very, very particular about that. Yeah. Can you see the Q&A down there? So I just wanted to open up for Q&A. I did want to talk about these guys a little more too. A couple things I really like about these pants is, I don't know if you can see, I don't have my suspenders here. I do have suspenders. There's little nubs. So when the suspender clamps down on the pant, there's like a little ridge here that it lifts onto. It's just like a little tiny bit of design that I absolutely love. So my suspenders will never fall off when I am wearing them, but they're in my other pants right now. And then at the very bottom, there's a little hook. You guys can see the hook, but you can change the cuff size as well. But you can take that hook, and especially in my mountaineering boots, it's super handy. But you just clasp it onto a lace, and now if you fall through snow, or if you fall through anything, your pants aren't riding up. Like when it rides up like that, your boot will fill with snow. That just keeps it really snug around the base of the boot, which is really awesome design. So I was hiking through knee-deep snow, and I just clipped those down, and it was no problem at all with my mountaineering boots. And then these guys also have a little tool loop. Keys at a very dangerous level, but yep. But you can, there's two little attachments for like carabiners or keys or whatever tools. If you have a multi-tool, it's super handy to have it right there. So anyways, there's a lot of little design elements of these pants in particular, the Kebs, that I really like. And I just wanted to mention that. You can even, and I usually use a carabiner whenever I go. I usually clip my Crocs to the outside of my bag because they're nice and light, they're waterproof, and then they don't tie up any room inside my bag. Yeah. But with that, I'd love to open it up for any. I know it's 45 minutes to talk about everything about the trekking, but I hope that gives a pretty good overview of at least how I pack for some things. But if there are any specific questions, I'd be very happy to address them from my perspective. Yeah, Gord?
Water filters.
Yeah, I meant to talk about that too. Really good question. So I don't use them. No, I'm just kidding. Water filters are awesome. I've got my. It's in my bladder right now, but I've got the Be-Free microfilter. So there's ceramic pump filters, which are going to be the best. They're going to get out pretty much everything, including most viruses, I believe. But for camping in the Rockies, I find getting rid of the protozoa, the bacteria, and the bigger items. I just use the Be-Free microfilter, and the cool thing about that is I just put it on the bottom of my water bladder. I fill it with stream water or lake water, and then I can fill my Nalgene bottle, and then I keep a 2-liter platypus in my pack as well.
What type of bladder is that you're talking?
So I've got a Hydro Pack. I've got a platypus bladder. I've got a Hydro Pack bladder, but so I've got a 3-liter Hydro Pack. So I take that, I scoop it, I fill that with water, hang it on a tree, and then there's the Be-Free filter, and then I can do gravity if I want. Like I'll take my Nalgene bottle and I'll loop it around so it just drips into there. But you can also squeeze and just push it through. And and then a pump, I think a pump does, what does it say, like a liter a minute, which is not super fast, but like the ceramic filters. I used to carry like a Katadyn pump, but it's so bulky, and I still have it, I don't use that much anymore. Other options would include boiling your water or using tablets, but I don't really like the taste of the tablets give. So
What's your standard about those straw filters? Like when
the Life Straw?
Yeah.
Life Straw is basically the same as a Katadyn Be-Free filter. Mm-hmm. So it's like the technology is the same. But yeah, I've heard, I don't use the Life Straw, but I know a lot of ultralight hikers use the Life Straw. Yeah, I think they're great, but I just don't happen to use them myself. The Nalgene bottles are cool because they actually screw right onto the wide mouth bottles, screw onto the bottom of a lot of the Catadin filters, like the pump filters. So they're super handy for that. I almost always have 3 liters with me when I go, and then I like to find out when I'm going to be crossing a stream. A lot of the maps will say where there's water spots or stream crossings, so you can kind of anticipate how far you have to hike between refills. But I have noticed, depending on what time in the year you hike, some streams will be completely dried up. So you got to be very careful. Like later in the season, it's going to be a lot drier than earlier in the season. And then winter, you can just always grab snow anywhere and melt the snow and then drink that.
You want to comment on electrolytes?
Yeah, I actually was. Yeah, thanks. And just so you guys know, Gord is a physiotherapist as well, so he's all about the body. And you used to do it for the Canadian Olympic swim team, didn't you? Which Olympics was it, for the Los Angeles one?
LA.
LA. Okay, that's awesome. So did I bring the noon?
Yeah, no.
Yeah, I have them somewhere. My fire starter. Yeah, they're there. Yeah, so I love these guys. Noon. It's magnesium, phosphate. It's a whole bunch of electrolytes, and yeah, I swear by these. They're so good for just not just rehydrating you, but just getting your salts and everything back in your body. But in first aid, they'll also say if you want to hydrate someone, don't give them these. Just give them straight normal water, and that's the best way to rehydrate someone. But if you are exerting or sweating a lot, you're going to be depleting a lot of your electrolytes. So these guys will replace them. So I'll usually do at least one of these a day. Yeah. So one of these in 500 ml of water, and it tastes great. And that's the reason I have the Nalgene bottle, because I only keep water in my hydration pack, because I don't like it getting gum. I never put sugars in there, and I suggest you avoid putting sugars, milks, and any kind of dairy in it, because there'll be residue left in in it and in the straw and the hose, and that'll just cause bad time growth and foul tasting things. So yeah, the Nalgene, you can throw them in the dishwasher. They're super good. They're easy to clean, so I dump these in there. Yeah. But also avoid sugars when you're hiking as well. It's just carbohydrates are not really the best thing unless you want a quick boost of energy. Yeah. Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit more about footwear?
Footwear, yeah. I love footwear. So, I like to wear hiking boots. I know a lot of people there's kind of 2 schools of thought when it comes to footwear. A lot of people like traditional, bulky, and I don't consider these too bulky, but bigger hiking boots, 6-inch or just above the ankle. A lot of the new school is kind of trail runners. So you've got a lot more flexibility. I do like having the ankle support, and I think for injury, it's still best to go with a hiking boot. And because I usually carry a heavier load, I do like a more solid boot. If you're doing very light or ultralight packing when you're kind of 20, 30 pounds or below, then I think a trail runner makes a lot more sense. I always take 2 pairs with me. So I've got my camp shoes, which may be Crocs or maybe my trail runners, and then my actual hiking boots. And then if I'm doing any summiting or objectives, then I have my mountaineering boots, which are a full shank. So the reason I like full shank boots, they're kind of essential if you're doing any ice climbing and you want to put on, fix your crampons to it. These are generally only going to go on a full shank boot, and what that means is the full shank has, it's got a full, it's usually it could be steel, it could be metal, or composite, or a carbon, there's carbon shanks as well, and it runs the full length of the boot from the back to the front, so you have a completely rigid boot. So I didn't bring my mountaineering boots with me, but they're harder to walk in, so it's way more comfortable wearing something that's bendy like this. But if you're doing glaciers or any kind of objectives, you want something that is very, very solid and firm so you can be climbing. Is that...
It's just one of the standard hiking boots.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, if you want
Yeah,
to.
so that's a standard nice 6-inch.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is...
That's what I wear, actually.
Yeah, these are great. I had my hiking boots, my original Reichels, which is an Austrian brand. I had them for 21 years. I only got these ones a few years ago, but I had them resold 3 times, and they were leather. I polished them all the time. I kept them in really good condition, and I had the insides patched up a lot. But 21 years I had to retire them. And these ones are so much lighter. I'm like, oh, they're so it is so nice. I love light hiking boots are great. Leather's a good material. It's a little heavier. There's a few new fabrics that are a little more breathable than leather, but leather is usually quite good for waterproofing. Again, if it's not breathing, you definitely want to air your boots out overnight, and I always recommend, I have separate insoles for mine too. So I've got, I take these insoles and I put them into my mountaineering boots or my snowboarding boots and swap them around, but I always take out the insoles at night just leave them like that, and they're going to air out a lot faster that way. And like if you can undo the laces and kind of pull the tongue out, you just want as much airflow so that they're nice and dry every single day. Yeah, that's so I have replacement ones of these that are like a little more cushiony and a little fatter that I quite like. Did that answer your question? Yeah. What do you have there?
Oh, these are just Kohan. They're not hiking boots.
Oh, okay. Carhartt, you said?
Kohan.
Oh, okay. And depending on what kind of objectives you're doing, like I do bring a climbing rope if I'm climbing, obviously, but if I'm doing glacier travel, I'll bring a rope. In winter, you definitely want to bring a shovel, probe, and a beacon. So if you get stuck in an avalanche, you can do a recovery. This is just really good for glacier travel as well. If you're ever on which I don't recommend ever going on a glacier unless you have actual mountaineering training, because there's a lot of dangers that are there. But just making sure that you're trained properly for whatever venture you're going on, and making sure that you're equipped properly. Something else that I always carry with me in the top of my pack is an emergency blanket. So this is a very lightweight Mylar emergency blanket, and it's incredibly light, very small, and if in an emergency, you can wrap yourself, or if you're doing first aid on someone, you want to keep them out of shock, so you want to address them and then keep them you make a little burrito with them in it, keeps them warm and keeps them stabilized so that they prevent shock. So these are like $5 or $6. I always have these. They're just handy for everything. There was, has anyone been down to Sunshine for skiing? Yeah, once a month, yeah. Sunshine, so right at the top of the Sunshine ski area, there's Sunshine Meadows, which is a very popular place for snowshoeing and cross-country skiing. And unfortunately, there was a lady who was very experienced and like a very competitive cross-country skier. And she was she went there all the time. She was doing her little route, and some inclement weather rolled in. And because she was so used to being like high aerobic and like very warm, she wasn't dressed very well. So she was out there, blizzard came in, completely lost her way, and then they found her body a few days later, and she was so close to where she needed. Just having, I know it's more weight, but preparing for an emergency is always going to be better than responding to an emergency when you're ill-equipped for it. So that's also why I always have my Garmin InReach satellite communicator with me in case I need to message. When I was in the Amazon, I actually got updates with the Oilers games when they were playing Las Vegas, which was definitely worth that $1 a message. But yeah, it's rather, they're super handy. And radios, I did bring radios as well. Anytime, and those are just VHF radios. If you want longer range, the VHF radios have longer range than UHF. But with my brother, when we're ski touring, it's amazing because if you shouldn't lose eyesight with someone, but it's good to be able to communicate like what your plans are, what your intentions are, so you don't have to backtrack. So it's a little bit of extra weight. I do like the radios. A Garmin or InReach or a Spot device like that is great, and I always have a headlamp with me as well. Because if cold or if night rolls in and you can't see, you're gonna have a bad time. Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah. Can you also give some pointers on the West Coast Trail?
Yeah.
Say you did it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll just say first of all, north to south is the way to go. Banfield to Port Renfrew is more fun. The reason being, it's a flat profile. Elevation gain is another thing to consider when you're doing hikes. But the West Coast Trail, and I've got some fun pictures of the West Coast Trail, but Banfield is, when you start at the north end, it's pretty flat profile until you get about halfway down, and then you've got a lot more of the up and down. So by the time you're fresh, and by the time you actually get there, half of your food is gone, so your packs are lighter, and you're a little more kind of used to moving. So I like north to south. Tide charts are another really important thing for the West Coast Trail, because when the tide comes in, you're going to have to go a different path than when the tide is out. So just being able to understand and read the tide charts and plan around that is really good. Meteorology is super good to plan for. And for my photography tours, I do a lot of, I do one-day intensive workshops, but I also do the Ecuador one that's 2 weeks. And we've got Tonkin Valley coming up and Skyline Trail in Jasper, and then the Tombstone one is full. But we talk about meteorology a lot, mainly for planning photos, but it also helps with planning your trip. So. Yeah, we talk about meteorology, navigation, and all sorts of orienteering and fun stuff like that. And we don't get really into mountaineering, but it's more how to get a good shot and understand everything.
And what kit would you say would be super essential?
What kit for the West Coast Trail?
What kit would be essential for that particular trail?
The West Coast Trail, gaiters. bring gaiters because it's wet. It's wet. It's muddy. Definitely bring hiking poles. I've got hiking poles here. Hiking poles, they're so good for going down. Like they're great for going up, but going down, it's going to take so much burden off of your knees. And yeah, if you could just, even if it's like 10% that is loaded onto your hiking poles, it saves your knees massively. What else is good for that? Yeah, a lightweight stove, just something tiny like this. Just lightweight gear is really good for that. It is very wet, I think, is the big thing. So I would say lightweight rain gear, not super heavy rain gear. You'll be using the rain gear quite a bit. But the gaiters are so good just for keeping your the crud out of your boots and stuff like that. And it's beach camping as well. So that's just something to keep in mind. It's really cool because you're sleeping on a sand environment, so you can actually kind of like just clear a path out, clear a pad out and kind of stay everywhere. So a ground sheet's a really good idea to prevent sand from getting into your tent and yeah. Aside from that, pretty much there's no really specialty gear for it. Yeah, bring less camera gear than I brought. Yeah. Oh, and then book early for it too. That's the other tip for the West Coast Trail, because that one books out usually, I think, January, February for that one. They might have changed it recently with the new Parks Canada redesign, but
in March 25th.
Yeah. Okay.
I called them, like I tried to book in, and everything was gone. Sorry.
It's crazy. Yeah.
It was like
Actually, on
20
that.
minutes.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, after 20 minutes.
Yeah, it's crazy how fast it books out.
it is.
If you guys want a tip for that, anytime you're booking with through the National Park booking system, there's an Alberta, not really a company, but it's a guy. It's called CampNab, Camp NAB. And what it does, you can sign up if you really want to hike the Skyline in Jasper, as an example. That one books out. That's usually the first one to book out across Canada is the Skyline, because it's a short window for hiking it. If you don't get the dates you want, you can actually sign up for notifications, because people cancel all the time. So it pushes a notification to your phone, and you can immediately hop on and book it. So if you really want to get, it'll monitor cancellations basically. So it's super handy to get that. It costs a little bit of money for each hike that you want to monitor. But if you're really keen on doing certain hikes, that's a really good one to have.
What's the app called?
CampNab.
CampNab.
Yeah, CampNab, and it's an Alberta development. It's just a guy who's developed it just scrapes the data from the website and updates you, but it's pretty handy. Yeah.
I think we got time for one more question. Sure. If anybody has any more questions.
I got a last slide. It says thank you.
Great. Perfect. Well, thank you. It was a great presentation. I learned a lot. And Scott has helped. But yeah, no, once again, that was a great informational presentation. Again, I learned quite a bit from it. I hope that all of you learned quite a bit from it as well. One last thing, we do have the giveaway. Does everybody have their tickets? Yes. Everyone? Yes. So I'm gonna have my little helper up front here.